Hey everyone, this is Roger Scholl. I am doing something a little bit different with this podcast today. Usually, the podcast is just audio recording voiceovers for the text that I write in my Substack. And I like having the audio companion. But I wanted to post this podcast. It's more of a discussion that me and my wife Sarah had with our friends Steve and Paula, because we met them some years ago and they started a simple church in their home. And when they told us the story of it, originally they said everyone in our home who comes gathers with us for church, they were either unchurched or unsaved the year before, the Easter before. And so everyone had either come to Christ or now is a part of their church, even though they were already Christians. And so we have been curious about that because they live in a middle class neighborhood that you'd expect in a lot of smaller cities in America like they live in. It's got a lot of 1 or 2 story homes, 2 to 4 bedrooms, mid 20th century brick homes. You see some playgrounds and trampolines in the backyard for kids, these sorts of things. And we just hadn't heard of many people who are starting churches with their neighbors in neighborhoods like this. And so this interview is more of a discussion just for us to learn. And the reason I wanted to record it and send it out is because multiple people have asked what Steve and Paula did, because a lot of other people were curious like us. And so this is really for all of you guys who asked for that and anyone else who this might help. And so it's stuff that me and Sarah, we're batting off ideas. We're hearing their story in their dining room. So, it's not a formal place, not like the highest audio. And even sometimes our kids will chime in, or I had to cut the audio because something happened and then we pieced it together. So it's not going to be the most perfect podcast you ever heard, but I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there about how to effectively reach a middle class suburban neighborhood and start a church by reaching lost people. One thing that I hear from them is that they heavily use events with intent. That's language that I learned from some other co-laborers in years past. But these events with intent follow this FIT criteria, which I have written about before on my Substack. But you can hear that these events with intent that they do, they don't call it that, but they are frequent, intentional to get to disciple making, and targeted to their culture. So frequent, intentional, and targeted is the acronym FIT that makes it event with intent. And so just notice that if you want to read more about what an event with intent is, go and check out that Substack post. Otherwise, enjoy the conversation, send it to other friends who might enjoy it as well.
We didn't get to do it every month, but when we moved here, we decided we need to really focus on our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And especially after we retired and we were here all the time, but anytime for anybody, focusing on your neighbors, because we realized so many people don't even know who lives beside them, or in front of them, or behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we should do so that we can be real Christians in a real world.
Yeah.
And so I had Bible studies with several of the neighbor ladies, either after work or after I retired. I was able to do some during the day, but focusing on getting to know people and them getting to know others. And this particular book we've used with several folks is called The Simplest Way to Change the World. And it's all about hospitality. Mm-hmm. It's written by 2 pastors, Dustin Willis and Brandon Clements. And just the whole idea of paying attention to the people around you. And like if you're out walking, especially during COVID, people started walking a lot. Just the principle of stop. Stop.
Yeah.
Talk about their dog, talk about their kid, talk about the baby in the carriage. Where do they live? Get to know them a little bit. So the next time around you go, hey, yeah, I remember your dog's named, Bravo or whatever.
Yeah.
And just pay attention.
You mean like literally just stop walking?
Yes.
And they will stop too.
Instead of just wave and go.
Yeah.
Actually stop and talk to them a little bit. Maybe you don't every time, but try to a lot, because we miss opportunities to connect with people. And so doing that, and we got to know enough folks that we started doing a spring and a fall neighborhood cookout.
Okay.
just taking a sheet of paper and write, neighborhood cookouts, such and such address, call us to RSVP. We provide hot dogs, hamburgers, and buns and all that. We say, bring a side and a drink, or bring a dessert and a side, whatever.
Yeah.
And bring lawn chairs. And we put a rain date. Yeah. But you never know, and it's hard to go back and connect with everybody later if you didn't put a rain date in there. And just take it to, a number of people around you.
You mean like a flyer?
Just like a flyer.
You're handing out, like, you knock on their door, hand it to them, and
if they're not there, you stick it in their door, because your address is on there, so they know it's somebody on these roads right here.
And you can ask people that that are open to coming to invite others.
So we have had folks from 3 roads, us and 2 roads over come. And they may bring somebody, and one of them loves to do bird sounds. So that was her big thing. The first time she came, she did bird sounds for everybody. And everybody remembers her now for doing that.
The purpose of gathering those to build community. We don't use that as a gospel proclamation, like a monologue. That some of our church members will strike up conversations sometimes during that, but we don't use it as
we open with a prayer. Yeah. We do a blessing for the food.
And then we build relationships and then try to follow up. That's just a door opener and getting people into our pool that we can work with. So.
And I've had women's meetings for the neighborhood, and I do call it a Bible study or a spring get together, or a spring tea. We had a Christmas tea one year, and get some of the neighborhood ladies that I know that are believers to help me, be the committee, so to say. And, you have a program, you have prizes, you have food, everybody brings something, just making it a fun time for the ladies. And that way you get their name, their address, their phone number. So we have a text with the women on the community here, where you can put prayer requests, praises, gee, I lost my dog, or whatever, to stay in communication, because our lives are so busy, we don't. So a text message is easy to send. And I like it because I'm seeing some of the other women put stuff. Well, at first, probably just me saying, pray for so-and-so, or do this. So I think that's helpful, staying in touch with your neighbors.
Concurrent with moving into this community, at that time I was serving as the leader of evangelism discipleship in a traditional church. And I had as a vision to train up members of the church to open their homes and reach their neighbors with the gospel. So we were going to call them community life groups. And I began to read some material by Caesar Kalinowski, who used to be with the Soma Church out of Tacoma, Washington. He had a podcast. He's got several books. And I was really struck by his teachings on rhythms of life. And he makes the point that we think that evangelism is something that you stop doing everyday life things and go over here and do evangelism. And so it drives people to think of evangelism sometimes as a project that you get your time in, or whatever. And what Caesar and the Soma Church was focusing on is integrate building relationships and sharing good news and bringing people into community into your life. And he said, just make sure that these rhythms become a part of what you're already doing. So there was very little that you would need to add on. And I turned to the page in one of the books here where it's listed as gospel rhythms. And he says, know the story. And by that, he means know how to share the good news from a biblical perspective, the history of how God created us and how we fell into sin. So it's not just a shotgun for spiritual laws kind of presentation, but here's the good news coming from the Bible. So know the story. And then he says, learn to listen to people. So as you're walking around and you're talking to them in the road, as you invite them into your home or they let you come into their home, make your first priority to get to know them by listening to them. And then he says, celebrate. That was the third one. Whenever if you struck up a relationship, a friendship, and they invite you to come to a birthday party, any kind of celebration, drop everything and do it. It's a relationship builder. We've even said in our house church, hey, if something like that's happening on a Sunday morning, go there instead of coming to our regular meeting time, because that gives you a chance to open a door. So celebrate. We've got a neighbor who she's 92 and she's Japanese. Her name is Kyoko. She married a North American, and we knocked on their door one day and took them some brownies. We just wanted to meet them. They lived 2 doors over, and we were kind of new here, and they invited us in. We stayed about 20 minutes. He was in his late 90s at that time. He's since passed away, but they were hungry for relationship. And Paula overheard, we were in there about 20 minutes, but Paula overheard them say that they were going to celebrate an anniversary in about 2 weeks. So she came home and wrote that down on the calendar and got a cake and looked up on Google how to say happy anniversary in Japanese and put that on there and took it to them on that date. Well, that just opened a door. We see this frequently, of reciprocity. Next thing we know, they're coming over here and bringing us these placemats with Japanese decorations and stuff. And that started a back and forth.
They've given us all those bowls and plates up there, those 3.
Yeah.
They
From Japan.
That's really nice.
They wanted to get to know us. We would have them over at Thanksgiving. They had no children, and they were old. And Easter. And he never came to Christ, but after he died, Kyoko is now part of our house church.
Okay.
She walks down that street there every Sunday morning and is here, is participative, even got to participate in facilitating some of the study the other day for the first time.
That's cool.
Yeah.
She's got her Japanese New Testament, her English.
Wow.
I mean, she speaks good English. She's been here since the 60s.
Right.
But when Morton, her husband, he was a retired professor in biochemistry, but he had a great deal of interest in anthropology. And Wake Forest University's anthropology department would invite him over to speak, and I forgot what they called it, but it was like anybody could come, just bring your lunch and sit and listen and dialogue with somebody who knows a bunch of stuff. And he was very learned on several Japanese internal cultures. And so I heard that he was doing that, and I grabbed a friend from church and we went, because this was a time of celebration. It brought us closer to him.
We've been to their art
exhibits and stuff. So celebrating with people builds a relationship. Blessing people. And what they're talking about there is if you see a need, everybody has needs. It can be a physical need, material need, spiritual need, emotional need, whatever it is, but be on the lookout for needs so that you can find a way to bless people. So that opens the door some more. Eating with people.
Yeah.
If they invite you in to eat, go. Invite them in to eat. Open your home. I like to stop at that point and say hospitality. Paula mentioned that a book she had read, and she mentioned the authors talk about changing the world. The key point is hospitality. And if we're open our doors and invite people in, they typically invite us into their homes and back and forth, and we can share more. But we began to use these rules. We put them up on the refrigerator for a while. We would say, all right, this week, how are we going to bless somebody? This week, what are we going to do to hopefully meet somebody new or strengthen a relationship with somebody we've gotten to know? All of this to get to, and I don't mean it's always in this order, but to get to another point, and that's telling our story. I remember Morton one day had us over on New Year's Day to have crackers, sushi, and Russian tea. It was the weirdest combination. And he was a very interesting man. He'd been in World War II, and I was interested in that. And I kept asking questions, listening. He cut me off. He said, "That's enough. I want to talk about you. How did you move from being a minister to being a missionary?" Wide open door to share the gospel. And I did.
No, a military gladiator.
What did I say?
Minister.
Military to, yeah, I was in the army. From military to becoming a missionary. So I got to share. So you're always, through this relationship building, looking for a way to build community, help people know each other through these bigger groups, but also build a relationship so you can naturally share the good news with them as well.
Yeah. So I guess that is, so with Kyoko, so that's when you could bring it up with like Kyoko as well. It's just, it sort of naturally comes up as people ask your story, you just start sharing your story, sharing the gospel more or less.
Yeah.
Would you say it's pretty common for everyone who started coming to your church from the neighborhood? It followed a similar pattern of just like, they came to a cookout, we got their number, we went and brought them cookies, they came to our place. Just as we were talking, we brought up our story, shared the gospel, and then invited them to our house for our church gathering. Is that kind of...
Sometimes the invitation to come to the gathering may precede a one-on-one sharing of the gospel. It's not always in that order, but we're always looking for that open moment when they seem to be receptive.
You tell me how we started on Easter?
Well, we did. We started on an Easter when I left my role in the church. When I retired, we had already decided we wanted to go back to doing house church. We'd done that overseas as missionaries. And so we decided we'd already built some relationships. We decided to invite some of those people to our front yard. It was during COVID time. And on Easter, and we decided to do it on Easter because we figured if anybody's not in church on Easter morning, they don't intend to go. And we wanted to reach out to people who are not involved. And so
we had a brunch. We had tables set out front, and they brought it, everybody brings something. We're gonna have a brunch and just bring a chair. We had chairs set out.
So we kicked off with that Easter morning, and then just said, hey, every Sunday morning we're going to do this. And eventually we moved inside, and I guess it's been
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Next month
that we started. We had a neighbor in front who Paula had witnessed to and begun to disciple once she made a decision. She brought her sister and I think a niece and nephew. Morton and Kyoko came. Paula had been tutoring by telephone a great nephew, I guess it would be, and she invited him, so he came and brought his family. They drove 20 miles, still drive 20 miles to be with us. They're the exception to the community.
I invited some students I had. I knew they were going away to college the next year, but they were still here during that time. So I had a couple of students that came, former students and present students. So
we try to add to it. We've added another couple who, Paula's sister and her husband. Our neighbors over here, the ones that used to live there, came that first time. So it's a community-based approach, but sharing the gospel and then using simple methodologies for simple church.
Yeah. And so that first Easter, was it just like a brunch, or did you like share like, hey, let's share the Easter story and then
Easter message?
Okay. Yeah. And people were like totally fine with that. And you said, hey, we're just going to do this every week, and if you want to come.
We had one.
Came.
They came, and when he got offended that we were talking about religion and left. We maintained a good relationship with him. I've been able to share very clearly.
He was like, listen, we have to be somewhere. And they just got up and because they had driven in the car, I think, that day.
Right.
And they just left. And that was okay.
Yeah.
Nobody got ruffled.
But everybody else stayed on. One couple that visited with us attended a church, but it was closed because of COVID. So when it opened back up, they returned to that church. But everybody else, pretty much, I'm trying to think through it, were, other than the few students that came at her invitation, were people who did not go to church anywhere. So there was a mix of people who said they believed in Jesus but didn't go to church, and people who weren't sure what the gospel was about altogether and didn't go to church.
Yeah.
So out of that, we we started and have
We just kept
continued.
setting up under the tree because we needed shade because that Sunday, Easter Sunday, we got sunburned. In the front yard playing, we got sunburned.
Yeah.
So we'd set up under the tree and it was neat because I thought neighbors that knew we invited them to could still see we're still doing it. So you're still invited.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't just a one-time thing.
Yeah.
It was like something.
Yeah.
I still like that now that we meet inside. Some of the neighbors still see cars in the driveway every now and then because some people drive, some people walk.
Yeah.
So
Great. Yeah, so what I think with in terms of like doing movements, like church planting movements overseas, like it's primarily or maybe only in like rural environments, villages, that sort of thing, smaller towns. And I think people have been trying to crack the code of like doing it in cities, which obviously the Holy Spirit's the one who does it. But I think in America, it's like we're like what 80-90% urban. And so when I'm thinking about in America, I'm realizing, or I have realized probably the biggest reason that the principles don't transfer well back to America from say Asia or you guys in South America, is in those cultures when I go, you know, the church time can be very focused on like the training aspects and like let's set goals and all this because they already have the community aspects down. It's like basically just your family in this village that you're gathering for this one specific church time, but we're seeing each other every day. Whereas in America, it's like this is the only time we might see each other, and so or possibly, but like very since in let's say Asia, you don't have to have a plan for creating community because there already is community. They don't have that in their strategy, you know, whereas here we try to do movement principles, but there's not the community.
right.
And so if there's not an intentional, simple strategy that you can use to build community along with sharing the gospel, it just doesn't work. And I think that's where people are getting really stuck in America, which is why I think like this is like really, really crucial. Because I think people think about this stuff and say like a low income community, like, oh, this community, we can do like a food outreach, which is great. It's like very obvious, like I guess obvious needs that like a lot of churches do that to build community and different stuff. But when it comes to like, because you guys are like in a middle class neighborhood, like it's not as obvious. There's still social needs are like immense, like emotional needs. People still have troubles in their marriages. You know, there's all this stuff. And so I think you know the Surgeon General said that like literally social isolation is an epidemic. That is social isolation is as bad as smoking 13 cigarettes a day. Is what they said, which is crazy. And so I think what you guys are saying is really, really important to us because I'm thinking about our neighborhood and it's townhomes, so we don't like have a front yard. We have a front driveway, which is still good for kids playing out front. But I'm just thinking like, is there ways, like we have a pool though, that like literally we walk by it leaving our neighborhood every single
Is there a green area that your apartment or your complex has, like where people could play football, kickball or?
Honestly, no, but the kids play in the street.
Okay.
And I'm thinking like there's this family we haven't met. I think they do this to meet people, but we haven't actually met them. They grill out like every day. No, we met them. We met them sledding.
We talked recently and he was like, "Oh, we're gonna get back out grilling again."
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah.
Was I in that conversation? Basically, they have a grill in their front yard, and then
That's one of the strategies listed here. Put your grill in your front yard.
yes, and they set up chairs. They have their whole
Yes.
garage. They actually have like a TV. Like it looks like they really set up a garage. Ours is just completely a junk in our garage.
Yeah.
But
It's organized.
That's okay.
I feel like from what you guys are saying might be a good thing is talk to him about like, hey, we can bring some sides. Would you want to grow out? And we can do like a cookout in the neighborhood.
Sure.
And there's a few other connectors. Like we know people who know people, and just start doing that. And then in the follow-up, because we already were thinking about baking cookies because Sarah makes great cookies to hand out to neighbors. Just like going back, handing out like, hey, we just want to see you again, and kind of starting from those points and then get into because we do get into sharing our story, sharing V's story.
I'm trying to get people's phone numbers. You with the ladies and you with some of the guys, maybe. And just touch and base with them every now and then if you don't even see them.
Yeah.
You can go out to a coffee shop with the guys and talk about whatever, but introduce spiritual issues into that. But we have a couple here, a young couple that lives in a community very similar to what you just described. It's an apartment complex. There's not a lot of green area, and I think what they're doing is good. She goes to the park with her little one and meets people there. half a mile maybe from where she lives, and then begins to try to connect further with them. So she's doing the mom thing. They're meeting some people in her community, the apartment complex. What we've encouraged them to do is if you make a friend with somebody and you begin to share with them and maybe begin to study God's word with them, ask them to invite some people in that are friends of theirs. And sometimes we did this overseas and it worked pretty well. We would say, hey, give us 4 weeks and we'll answer all your questions as best we can about what this Jesus man's about. No pressure, come ask questions and they would do it. But we were leaning on this person that's become a good friend to invite their friends.
Okay.
And it would be evangelistic. Well, we talk about discovery Bible studies. It was that kind of a thing. But we usually in Ecuador would see churches born out of that kind of effort. Here, it may be a little harder. I don't know. People are less trusting, but that's really leaning on others that you've made friends with to and have start studying the Bible with you to open up to bringing in their.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking like in our neighborhood, we've met maybe a few people who I feel like know folks that have just been there a lot longer.
Yeah.
One guy in particular is very searchable, not a believer. Yeah. There's this other I feel like there's this other woman around the corner who there's like if you go to the backside, like basically like our neighborhood's like a square, and if you go to the opposite side of the square, there's this woman, I forget her name at the moment, I can look it up, but I'm pretty sure it's like Amy or something, but they had a bunch of like Christmas decorations like through the holidays, this whole backside. They also have like more kids, kind of elementary school kids, but so our kids would just go to look at the Christmas decorations in the winter, and the kids were not playing, it was so cold, but Amy came out and sat on her doorstep when I was with the boys one just to talk. Yeah. And I think that she knows a good amount of people in that corner and type of thing. And she's had some like religious stuff in their front yard. I don't know if she's a believer, but it might be something where she might have some openness to that sort of, or like possibly if she has openness, she would know people to invite. So it's like finding them. There's also a lot of renters in our neighborhood, and that's a little bit harder because like we were trying to do some of the stuff like the blessed thing, like some people had twins 2 doors down to us who brought in diapers. They moved out like a month later. So like,
but you blessed them.
Yeah, blessed them still.
It's very worth it.
The boys' trip, Chase.
Yeah, it's very worth it.
Yeah. So
I think if you're using this, listen, celebrate, bless, eat, tell your story, tell God's story kind of thing. The danger I saw as I was training people is that they would just go out and listen, and they got a lot of people that they're listening to, but you got to move people down the field, so to speak, with these things so that you get to the point that in a very natural way, you're sharing the story and answering questions and inviting them into a relationship.
Yeah.
So you got to do all of it. You got to be sowing in an area to make new contacts, but you got to work with the people that you've got. One of the things that we've used, we'll ask a probing question, and if somebody latches onto it, leans into it, then we can go further. If they are like this, we'll pull back, come back another day.
Yeah.
So we
like what? What's the probing question?
We've asked, who do you think Jesus is? Something like that. And if you're like, I don't want to talk about religion, we'll pull back. I'll probably come back another time and approach it from another angle. But we don't go into a situation with I'm going to share the gospel verbally or bust, because if I'm forcing it down a person's throat, they're not receptive and it's not accomplishing anything. So we're in it for more of a long haul. Yeah. And I think it's appropriate to say at this time, not everybody is leans in. Yeah. We met a guy walking his dog and became friends with him. His wife was on some kind of a trip for 3 or 4 weeks to Europe, and we invited him over to eat, and the relationship built up. But when we got to talking about spiritual things, he said he went to a church, but Boy, he
And he
pulled
kind of
back.
walks the other way sometimes when we're walking.
So not everybody, leans in, and I'm gonna work,
At you when you walk.
gonna work with the ones that lean in. So on one hand, here we're talking about how to start a group, but I think it's important for us to say that our strategy is a discipleship strategy.
Mhm.
If this room that we're in is where we meet, and 15 is starting to get crowded. That's kind of our upper limit. Every now and then something special happens, we crowd in more, but if only 5 are really serious about becoming disciples, I'm going to pour into them. So I don't count success based on the number of people here, more on the number of people who are wanting to be disciples and be about sharing their faith. Whereas when I was in the pastoral ministry in the traditional church, it was all about people in pews and numbers and programs and everything. Here it's, if there is a head count that matters, it's ones that we're discipling.
Yeah. And I know in that you guys are asking them to bring their friends. You guys are also training people to do what you guys have done. Would you say that other people have been able to take this and like kind of replicate it as well in their neighborhoods, or like the people in your neighborhood able to know how to like talk to their friends or invite other people in?
It's half and half, I'd say. We've got some who are doing it, and others who, I wouldn't call them that publicly, but they're more or less strap hangers. They come and attend the service, and they talk about it, but they don't do anything.
Yeah.
But we do have, I'm thinking of Vicky, who you
Yeah, she has a
disciple.
study.
She's got a study
Okay.
with some women
This is from the neighborhood as well.
across the street.
Okay.
The young couple that lives in an apartment complex nearby, they want to start a group in their area. They're still in our house church, but the goal is get rid of them, in the sense of them starting over there.
Yeah.
And I spend time with him, and they're active. The young lady I spoke about going to the parks with her little boy and meeting their neighbors. She met a Japanese couple, of all things, Japanese young couple. He's working at, what is it, Honda here? It's Honda. And she said, hey, we've got a lady in our church who's Japanese. I want you to meet her. And she coordinated to bring the wife and their little baby over to Kyoko's house 2 doors down. And Kyoko said, you ought to come to our church. We meet in the house. And they don't know what church is. They're from a secular, if anything, Shinto, traditional religion background. They're really not anything. And they were still struggling to learn the language, but they could understand enough. And so she would help interpret for them, but they came for a while and were hearing and learning a little bit. But so that's an example of how one of the young ladies is making connections and reaching out. So I'd say about half our people are being faithful, and the others need to become more faithful. It's the best way to put it.
I mean, that sounds like a pretty good ratio. Like, of course you want 100%, but like in terms of like realistically, you're not going to get 100%. So 50% is. I mean, I guess. It sounds like there's a different woman out in San Diego who actually is the only other example that I know of like really being able to start a group in a middle class neighborhood. Well, that's not true. But like it seemed like a good, like where I learned about it. It's not the only one maybe, but she kind of talked about how it's like you have casual conversation, move to meaningful conversation, move to spiritual conversation, and move to a discovery conversation in terms of like your relationship with people. Like you don't want to just stay in casual or meaningful. Like you want to get to the gospel, you want to get to spiritual. But I think what I'm hearing you guys saying, like almost like you're helping people discover who Jesus is and a lot versus like just trying to like bring up and like monologue. Like I'll just tell you who Jesus is. Like you say with the probing questions, it's like, what do you think about Jesus? Like it's more of like a dialogue and discussion and discovery. Even if it's not discovery, Bible study in the moment, you're helping them discover just through the conversation.
Say we make a contact through our hot dog supper here. We might invite them over to eat, and that dinner conversation may not involve the gospel at all. It may be just building the relationship. I'm always looking for a opening though. If there's a segue, I'll pursue it even on the first opportunity. But sometimes it feels forced, and it feels forced when I feel like they're not interested. And but we do. I like that lady that you tell me about with the 4 levels. That may be something of how we're doing it as well. We're probing and trying to get closer, and then invite them into a relationship with Christ, and sometimes that starts with inviting them to just come and see what we're doing here in the house, and that's a wonderful way for them to hear. I've heard of people, Caesar Kalinowski I mentioned, they as a group, we've not done it, would set aside one night per week when the community would come together, and they would encourage everybody to bring a friend who's not involved. And they would share a meal together, and then one of them would share a 10-minute story, God's story in 10 minutes. And they do that over and over, week after week with people. And that was one way that they made connections around a meal, very low key, a lot of dialogue and question and answer. And so there are a number of ways, but it all comes down to loving people, which means spending time, and being hospitable. I've really been struck as I've looked at the qualifications of church leadership. To be an elder, you must be hospitable. And
That's interesting to think about, because we don't think of men typically as hospitable.
Yeah.
You think of the lady being the one as hospitable, but I think it's neat. God says leaders.
I try to look back and think, all right, when Paul's writing this, what's going on? And I'm convinced that these elders were probably facilitating house churches, gatherings, small gatherings. They themselves were helping others do it, but a qualification, a prerequisite for being an elder is that you had to be one who was loving strangers, which is really what that's about, the hospitality piece. Hospitality isn't just having some kind of an ice cream supper with the church, a fellowship thing. It's got an element of opening the door and inviting people in. And so the hospitality piece is key. I don't think people are going to be successful very long at creating church in a simple way if they're not hospitable. That's key.
In this book, one of the paragraphs that I had outlined in this Simplest Ways to Change the World book says, turning our ordinary homes into weapons for the gospel. I never thought of that. I like that terminology. And opening our normal lives to welcome others as Christ welcomed us is a calling that every single one of us can do. No Christian is above or below this call to practice biblical hospitality as a way of life, and no other practice so clearly and simply puts the welcoming grace of our God on display. And we found after being gone 25 years from this, we come back for furlough once in a while, but not living here for 25 years. Before that time, people would invite you, come over to our house Friday night or whatever night, we're gonna make lasagna or whatever.
Or Sunday right after church, come over, let's eat.
But we found out 25 years later, nobody invites you to their home. They'll say, let's go meet at whatever restaurant, or something like that. They don't invite you to their home. So I think that is something that these authors really hit on, these pastors hit on, is that opening your home. Because when we invited our new neighbors, because we look for new people in the neighborhood, invite them, go take them cookies, say hi, give them your name, your phone number, and get their names and stuff. And then, a little bit later, invite them over for dinner or something. We invited the people here. And it was funny because she said, we were a little hesitant because people don't invite people to their homes. And I was like, you're kidding. I don't understand that concept of not wanting to accept an invitation, but that's the way it is now. Many people are there kind of like, should we go? Should we not go? And we're
Yeah.
glad they came because we found out they're believers and now they help us in the ministry in the community.
That's another thing that the community gatherings help with. It breaks the ice. If we start by, hey, come on over to our house and eat, some people are gonna go, oh, we're not used to that. But if they've been in our backyard and they've met friends and neighbors, they're much more inclined to come. So that can help break the ice.
Yeah, it does.
It's not always that way. Some people are just friendly and they're gonna come. But our neighbors, they were, and they're believers. They go to a traditional church. It's like, come to your home? Strange.
I just thought that was unusual.
Yeah.
That's true because people don't have people in their homes nowadays, but
Yeah.
seeing here, it says turning our ordinary homes into weapons for the gospel was some terminology I hadn't thought about.
Yeah. I think it's really good.
A lot of people, well, we do too. We've got a garage here and a garage door opener, and I just push it and I drive in and I push it and it closes and I'm in the house. And if we live our lives that way and don't get out in the front yard, get out on the sidewalk, get out and walk in the street and meet people that will stand our castle and be ineffective.
Yeah.
So you have to be intentional and like putting a checklist up. Who am I going to bless this week? Who am I going to celebrate with this week? Who am I going to go and build a friendship with and listen to their story this week?
Yeah.
And then just keep doing it because it's easy to stay in your castle and just participate in your gathering once a week or twice a week and not really touch the neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good.
And so, if I have an opportunity to plug someone, if you're interested in how to be a community worker, Caesar Kalinowski has several books. This one's Zondervan. It's called Transform, a New Way of Being Christian, that deals with some of these rhythms. Probably the best one that deals with the rhythms by Caesar Kalinowski is one called Small is Big, Slow is Fast. And he has a section that deals with the rhythms. And then he's got this is what I'm doing, using as a discipleship tool with one of the men in our group that it's really taken hold of this. And it's called the Gospel Primer. And it just helps build those rhythms, learn to share the story with others. It's really good. So cool. Anybody wants to read up on it, those are the books that got us thinking this way.
Okay, so Caesar Kalinowski.
Yes.
It's good. Sarah, did you have any questions or thoughts or anything?
I wanted to hear about the women's Bible study, but I can't see that.
Well, my wife leads that, so I'll let her answer it when she gets back from the kitchen.
Yeah, women's Bible study. Yeah, I think there's probably more women in our neighborhood anyway than men. Slightly.
Get out. I think, yeah, maybe slightly, but I think the women are just outside.
Well,
like there are a few like single moms or something.
Yeah, I think there's well, that's what I mean is like there's single moms or empty nesters, even like empty nesters like older. Whereas I don't know a lot of guys in our neighborhood that are just single guys.
There are some guys like Tommy was saying. There's a couple single guys that live in the townhouses, but they just don't they're not outside.
Okay. Yeah.
Women tend to be outside more and making contact. It's better for my wife to be up in front on those contacts and so forth, but that helps. I am convinced that this is what we're supposed to be about as believers. And I've sought to train some traditional churches to start groups like this. If they wanted to make it a feeder group into the church, fine, but there's just not been a heart for doing that. And to illustrate why I think it's so important, we've been at this, I guess, 34 months. At the 30-month part, maybe at the 28-month part, we baptized a bunch of people. But here's what I would say. In a 30-month period, 13 people were baptized. If you extrapolate that, to a church like I used to attend or was serving at, which, it had about 400 people attending on Sunday morning. They were going to have to be baptizing about 30 people every quarter. They're not coming anywhere near to it. So even though we're small, we might feel like, oh, we're not big, we're not significant compared to the brick and mortar, big cathedral kind of church.
With women in the neighborhood,
Yeah.
believers,
I
not
think Sarah was
believers.
interested in your
Yeah,
discipling, your long Bible study with the women.
yeah. Well, those are just special times, and we've done, certain
Yeah.
books. We're getting ready to do one with a few ladies about Philippians. Because it's like 4 chapters, so it can be 4 weeks, because one lady has to get childcare, and so we're like, we don't want to book you for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
And so just trying to do stuff like that, seeing what the needs are, and then that book that I did with the pastors, I did that with 2 of my neighbors here, and they're much more conscious now of doing stuff with their neighbors. And so seeing whatever the need is, and then pick something you want to study, whether it just be a book in the Bible, but trying to have a regular time, and we just do it around the table here. Always have snacks, have tea, have coffee, whatever, make it pretty casual, but make it important.
We've been traveling because of the state situation. We're working with my aunt. And we've been able to just say, hey, Vicki, the keys in the mailbox out front. We had to leave at 6 a.m. urgently when my aunt called and was having a respiratory problem. And church goes on. It's not like, oh, you're not there. It's got to close down that day.
Yeah. And you guys, for your church, you guys just do like the 3/3, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We do.
But it was so neat because one day when Steve's been sick with bronchitis, he's back in the bedroom. And I had to take one of my daughters to the urgent care one Sunday morning all of a sudden. So I left my keys in the door and left everything open. And one of our daughters went by later and she's like, Mom, Dad, another Sunday when we weren't even here, she said, I knew y'all weren't even there, but there were cars in your driveway. Y'all were having, and I'm very proud of our folks and thankful for them that they're willing. And so they know where the cups are, they know where the plates are, they know where the snacks are, or they bring snacks. But seeing that it doesn't depend on us to be around.
And everybody, I think, correct me if I missed it, I think every single person, I'm talking about people who are teenage and up, have facilitated. They've had the experience of doing it. They
lead.
They help somebody and then they do it themselves. It's easy to do. And
we found changing it to another location. Sometimes people don't come. The ones that walk can't walk, there. So we just do it here, whether we're here or not here. They know where all the chairs are in the basement. If you need more chairs.
Yeah, we're great. That's awesome. Well, I think it's really helpful because I'm just thinking about our churches that we have in the Raleigh-Durham area. And I think for the most part, I guess there's a Bible study that has neighborhood people, but for the most part, it's like we're gathering people from workplace or friends, type of thing, which is great.
That's great.
Which is great.
Yeah.
And I don't want to stop that because it's utilizing, you don't have to have any time to your life to reach out at work. It's just talk to people at work. But I think it would be really good for us to even move in the direction of our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I would say only a few people actually bought where they live. So we have a lot of people are transient. So it's kind of hard to have the investment.
Love them and invest in them. Then maybe when they move elsewhere.
That's true. That's true.
I think it's important to say that we probably spent a good year, because I was still serving on staff at a church 25 miles away. A good year developing the relationships here before we actually sent out that flyer and invited people in. So we plowed the ground a little bit. So it may take some time to build those relationships. If you just send a flyer out and you just barely met the people, they may not come. It may take some more plowing, but it's worth the time.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say is, it sounds like when you were first, you're talking about those, we need to write them down, but just like the celebrate
books. He's going to give them the books.
Sure.
Oh, we got them. I wrote it down there.
But celebrate listen, celebrate. I don't know.
What-
Have a eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, have over for dinner. That's too long.
Yeah.
Share.
Share. It's like those things. It sounds like that's do that.
Yes.
And then like the cookouts and everything, that's going to be great. But like what we need to think first is just like ground level, like because
And maybe invite one family over.
yeah,
after you
that
get
we're
to know
like,
them a
oh, there
little
seems
bit.
like a connection here. We got invited to one birthday party, so
Yeah.
and we said we would definitely come.
Yeah.
And she's inviting like all the daycare kids
That's
and
cool.
our kids. So
Very cool.
Yeah.
So
It's the only family that has kids our age.
Yeah.
the other people have older kids, but the
Yeah.
kids are nice to our kids.
Yeah.
Not to meet them, they could be babysitters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, let's focus on that. I do think the cookouts and all that will be
Yeah.
really good. And I want to, but we have some time before summer.
Well, I think we could do simple stuff to like celebrate, like that is kind of an event with intent, but it's not like crazy. Like let's say the boys' birthday is over the summer, sometime around that,
Yeah.
bring a few buckets of ice cream and sprinkles and chocolate syrup.
Like move with a van and do it.
Or we could even do it at the pool. Probably.
It's true.
Just like they have a table there.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
they say no food, but everyone brings
Really?
food.
No.
I think so, but everyone brings
That's
food.
lame.
So I don't know.
We'll set up right outside the pool.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Say celebrate Asher outside.
The deepest
But
relationships.
just stuff like that.
I think the deepest relationships are those where you've got a couple or a family at your table and you're talking about anything and everything, and you can introduce spiritual matters and ask them, well, what do you think about Jesus? And build on that in a way that they don't feel threatened. And sometimes that's out of your hands. We've had
Right.
We
And
had a
that's
couple
encouraging to hear those stories too. It's like even if those things happen, we didn't do anything wrong. Like,
Yeah.
We had a couple from down the road. They moved in. We took them cookies, had them come up to eat. We turned them off with Jesus. We didn't mean to, but when we took it to spiritual level, they were like, they weren't rude, but they didn't.
They were like, we don't want
They didn't want to
like
come
that.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it happens.
Yeah.
But there are also people who lean in.
Yeah.
And if they lean in, we're going to go deeper with them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important because even one couple we were talking to recently, I think they were hitting some of that people not as interested like in their initial attempts, and they're like, well, maybe I think it was getting discouraged, but really it's just keep on trying.
You keep on trying. I remember we were training some of our tribal leaders in Ecuador, and missionaries for so many years kind of had this idea, and it would go over to the nationals as well, of I'm going to plant a church in such and such a place or bust. That kind of an idea.
Mhm.
And so they felt like we got to drive it home here. But if God's not at work in that group of people, you're not going to do anything. So you look somewhere else. And so here's the point I want to make. Paul says in 2 Timothy 2:2, invest in faithful people. Well, I found as a missionary, if I have this planted church here or bust, I'm actually investing in unfaithful people.
Mhm.
And if that consumes all my time and I don't move on
Mhm.
to the rest of 359 degrees that's around me, I myself become unfaithful. So the key is to keep fishing. If people don't respond, move on. There will be people that won't respond. You just got to keep moving. And I don't mean cut people off. We had one community that Pitana Baja, I remember it was a Quechua community where we saw some people pray to receive Jesus, but they weren't interested in really going any further, being discipled. And so we had to back away and say, hey, when you're ready, we'll be glad to help, and move on and invest in other communities and other people, because God has his people that he's going to call, and we just don't know who they are. We got to keep looking and not get discouraged even if the majority of people, I think we should expect that the majority of people are going to be standoffish and not receive. But there's some people out there that God's moving in that direction. It's rich when you see that. So keep fishing, keep moving on to the next group of people.
Like one of the couples down here that they were like, whoa, we're never coming back. But I got their anniversary, so I send the lady a little happy anniversary thing every year on her anniversary, online,
Yeah.
no touching, no going to your house. But she always writes back, thank you so much for remembering, so people pay attention to little stuff, even though they may not be ready for Jesus yet.
In our community, we've only had one ugly experience where people said, don't you ever come back here with that religious stuff. That was kind of the way they put it. And so we pull away. We don't leave it in the house. Most people are very polite, even if they don't want to hear. And so we're not getting doors slammed in our face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it's always like, anyway, it's always a little more nerve-wracking in your own community, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where you live. And so I think, and just hearing your story is really encouraging. And like, I think we just really need to pray for a real love for our neighbors as we are bold, right? Like both of those hand in hand. And
That's true.
because it's easy to be bold. You're just going to a different area.
Yeah.
Then you just like go on. No, they're not open. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or they are, praise God.
Yeah.
But it's easier to be bold, at least for me, in areas I don't like.
Right.
And so I think, like even with some of my neighbors, like I know the one woman that invited us to thing is like she's not a believer.
Yeah.
And but she talks a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out like, you know what I mean? It's just that person that they'll end up like talking
Yeah.
the whole time.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, like this is great. I'm so glad I'm listening. But I'm trying to get, but I know that'll come in time and probably with a lot more intentional prayer.
Yeah.
Be like, Lord, really show me where those openings are. Like, and help me to be ready for them instead of just, I want to have a good relationship with my neighbor. No, I do, but I actually want them to have a good relationship with Jesus. So
We're realizing that we're to invest in people as believers. We're to invest in people. That's the big deal. So who have I invested in? Who am I trying to bring closer to Christ? Who am I loving on? There was a lady in Argentina that felt her kids rejected her. She has strong character. And one of our times we came back from furlough, I just said, Lord, I need extra love for this person. Because it was hard to be around her kind. She was a believer, but just
not
rough
super
edges,
soft.
rough edges.
Yeah.
And so I asked the Lord to really do that. And so then I intentionally took her with me places and got her to go with me on a regular basis to do stuff. We became very good friends. We're still on WhatsApp. She calls us, once in a while. She's in her early 80s, I guess, by now. But I saw God use her, and even her kids were like, believe you're spending time with my mother. I'm like, I love your mother. Because God gave me that love for her and seeing her come out. She helped in many ways because she's been a former nurse. She was able to get somebody in the hospital that we couldn't get. And another lady got saved as a result of that. And then the husband got saved because of that. So she was able to be very useful in God's kingdom. So some people are going to be hard to love, but Jesus loves all of us. So we're rough too sometimes. So. Seeing what's out there.
People, not programs. Paul in 1 Thessalonians 2:19, I guess this is the NIV, says, for what is our hope, our joy, or the crown in which we will glory in the presence of our Lord Jesus when he comes? Is it not you? It wasn't buildings. It wasn't programs. It wasn't sermons. It wasn't these neutral things that are out there. It's investing in people's lives. So if working through your home, being hospitable and investing in people's lives is what counts. And in a way, I think Paul says his reward will be directly connected with the disciples that he's made.
You've got some perfect, useful tools here because that's what we were told when we first went to Argentina. An older missionary told us, your kids will open doors for you. And they will.
They did.
They did.
Yeah, they really do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's people who say hi.
Yes.
Twins.
Yeah.
And they're so friendly. They'll walk out our door and they'll be like, Miss Carol, they always say hi. They're like the first people to say hi to the neighbors we know.
Yeah, because some people say, oh, I can't do this or that because I have kids.
Yeah.
No.
It actually makes it easier.
Yeah, do it the other way.
It's probably how some people, he's a big giant.
Now,
So-
I can't help but think, though, that